welcome to my Fashion Stories Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. I am Catherine, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this new episode of your new silhouette analysis appointment. Today, fasten your seatbelts. We're off on an interstellar journey to a galaxy far, far away. Space is no longer just the preserve of astronauts and billionaires longing for weightlessness. It's also, and has been for a long time now, an inexhaustible source of inspiration for fashion. From Courrèges to Coperni, from white boots to aluminum dresses, futuristic capsules and collaborations with space agencies, the conquest of space has always fascinated designers. In this episode, I invite you to explore what we call space-age fashion. Together, we'll trace the origins of fashion's fascination for space exploration and the consequences this fascination has had on the imagination and the futuristic dreams it continues to fuel from the 60s to the age of artificial intelligence. We will examine how astronaut suits inspire fashion designers and the key elements found in space-inspired collections. We will analyze the return of the space age in current fashion, as well as the symbolism and fantasies we harbor today about our dreams of space exploration. Let's embark on our intergalactic journey to infinity and beyond. It's the early 1960s. Man has not yet set foot on the moon, but he has already set foot in the imaginary future. The Cold War is in full swing, and the conquest of space is becoming a field of technological, ideological, but also aesthetic competition. The space race between the United States of America and the USSR fascinates the entire world. Who will be the first power to send men into space? Who will be the first power to send men to the moon? And then, how we will dress? What will be the consequences of this small step for man, but giant leap for mankind on everyday life, on the future? The USSR led the way with the first manned human space flights, with Yuri Gagarin on April the 12th, 1961, followed by Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to go into space on June the 16th, 1963. Then came the first lunar landing by the United States and the Apollo 11 mission on July the 20th, 1969, with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. These events sparked a collective enthusiasm for science, technology, and the future. All this fascination with the conquest of space would translate into a desire to break with traditional codes, driven by a generation seeking emancipation and optimism. It was in this context that a resolutely new fashion emerged, looking forward towards elsewhere. Pioneers of cosmic style in fashion were three: André Courrèges, Pierre Cardin, and Paco Rabanne. These three designers designed clothes combining geometric lines, synthetic materials, and metallic colors, drawing inspiration from astronaut uniforms and launching their visions of a futuristic society. Materials never used before in fashion would be incorporated, such as PVC, vinyl, plastic, metal, metallic fabrics, and other synthetic fibers, often shiny and glossy, to evoke spacesuits and astronaut equipment. The cuts would be geometric, refined, sometimes modular, including trapeze dresses, miniskirts, a sartorial symbol of the 60s, silver boots, helmets, and other futuristic accessories. The dominant colors would be white, silver, metallic tones, and a few bright shades. But before analyzing the style of the three founding fathers of space-age fashion, let's go back to the origins, those of the aerospace suit and uniform. As you've probably guessed, The main inspiration for futuristic fashion in the 60s was the uniform worn by astronauts and everything related to space travel. So let's go back in time to understand how the uniforms worn by astronauts, these new superstars, appeared and evolved. When creating what would become the spacesuit, the first challenge was to develop something that would allow survival in a hostile environment. The parameters to consider were altitude, pressurization, lack of oxygen, insulation to survive extreme temperatures ranging from minus 233 degrees to plus 123 degrees, protection against UV and other glare, and protection against abrasive dust and micrometeorites. The challenge is therefore significant and involves many unknowns. The spacesuits worn by astronauts during flights and spacewalks are a legacy of aviation and the quest for altitude records. The first spacesuits were directly derived from the outfits worn by airplane and hot air balloon pilots who flew at very high altitudes from the beginning of the 20th century. During the First World War, with the rise of military aviation, pilots began to wear thick clothing to combat the cold. The first oxygen masks were also introduced to compensate for the scarcity of oxygen at altitude. In the 1920s, the first flight suits appeared incorporating oxygen masks and thermal protection. However, beyond 10 kilometers in altitude, this equipment becomes insufficient, paving the way for pressurized suits. The very first pressurized suit, the Che-1, was developed in 1931 by the Soviet engineer Chotovsky, originally for very high altitude balloon flights. However, its rigid design limited mobility. Nevertheless, this model paved the way for the creation of other prototypes during the 1930s. And the Spanish Emilio Herrera Linares would eventually develop a suit for balloon flights, incorporating a microphone, measuring instruments, and a breathing system. The primary inspiration for spacesuits, therefore, seems to come from research related to altitude. How to breathe when there is almost no oxygen left, how to protect the body against pressure changes, not to mention freezing temperatures. Another inspiration that makes perfect sense, to me at least, is the underwater diving suit and diving equipment, which fulfill exactly the same functions. Being able to breathe and move in a hostile environment with temperatures radically different from those on the surface, with pressurization and gravity, or perhaps even weightlessness, also different. Man's age-old dream of flight combined with the conquest of the ocean deeps come together for the conquest of space. In any case, the primary function of this spacesuit is one of protection and survival. In addition to the spacesuit, astronauts also wear a uniform. This uniform is directly inspired by the military uniforms of the Air Force. We therefore remain in this connection between space and air. The aerospace uniform has its origins in the uniform of military aeronautics officers, which in France became a separate army corps in 1912. The first Air Force uniforms were inspired by those worn in the army, with some distinctions, however. They will have specific color tabs and dedicated colors. Then, in the 20s and 30s, specific outfits would be introduced to meet the needs of aviators, which differ from those of infantrymen. And the blue uniform of the Air Force was introduced in 1929. The spacesuit therefore combines technological innovations and military symbols, which, in the 60s, would be used as a source of inspiration for space-age fashion designs. So, What are these visual and aesthetic quotes that Courrèges, Cardin, and Rabanne adopted? Let's start with colors. During the various space missions of the 60s, different dominant colors can be identified. White is the first dominant color of this space aesthetic. This color choice is due to the fact that white helps to reflect heat and distinguish astronauts in the darkness of space. The second dominant color is midnight blue, related to the Air Force uniform as we just saw. And the third color is silver, referring to the metal parts used in the construction of spacecraft and other tools, notably for their insulating, conductive, and reflective properties, among others. To these three colors, we can add red stripes and any other markings intended to differentiate the crew members, particularly during spacewalks. In addition to colors, there are insignia and other badges. These elements are sewn into spacesuits and uniforms to identify the missions, the space agency, and the astronauts' roles, using stripes, embroideries, and engraved buttons. The cut is also important. Spacesuits have clean, minimalist cuts, inspired by the aerodynamics of spacecraft. And then there are the material used and the finishes. Multi-layer fabrics are used to create spacesuits, some with up to 16 layers. This is all to ensure tear resistance and thermal reflection as well as insulation, in order not to be too hot nor too cold as much as possible and to protect vital functions. Let's not forget the accessories, including transparent bubble helmets or those with gold visors, reinforced gloves, protective boots, survival backpacks, and integrated communication systems. Spacesuits protect against extreme temperatures, void, micrometeorites, and radiation, while also providing the mobility and dexterity necessary for manual tasks in space in zero gravity. These suits also incorporate thermoregulatory elements, circulating water, cooling systems, pressurized layers, and life support systems for oxygen filtration and hydration. They are often modular and tailored to each astronaut's body shape, with removable elements as gloves, visors, and additional protections, depending on the mission. These suits and uniforms are designed with several factors in mind, such as adaptability, comfort, and rapid identification as priorities. How did these elements inspire the 60s fashion designers, and what were the most iconic space-age accessories? This is what we'll now discover. One of the first to launch a collection inspired by this conquest of space was André Courrèges, with his Moon Girl collection in 1964. And this makes sense when you consider that André Courrèges was a former fighter pilot and trained engineer. His dream, put simply, to send his models into space and make them as famous as the astronauts of the time. How did Courrèges integrate space into his collections? Let's first look at the cuts and silhouettes. We see straight, clean cuts, often geometric, with a strong architectural influence. We see tunic dresses, miniskirts, and play suits that liberate movement and modernize the feminine wardrobe. We see silhouettes reminiscent of robots and the world of astronauts, presenting a structured and graphic effect. Let's now move on to the colors. We can see the omnipresence of white, a color André Courrèges considered the color of the future. We see featured many primary, bold, saturated colors as well as sharp contrasts. The next step in our analysis of Courrèges' space-age style is the materials used. Courrèges used many new materials that were unprecedented in the fashion world at the time, such as vinyl, PVC, plastic, aluminum, thick cottons, wool, and rubber. All of this was done to achieve futuristic shape and look. Functionality is also at the heart of Courrèges creations with large patch pockets, second skin tights, the disappearance of traditional suits in favor of more functional, comfortable, and dynamic pieces. The key pieces emblematic of the Courrèges styles are the white vinyl miniskirt, a symbol of modernity and emancipation, the flat white boots, which have become a signature element of the Courrèges style and commonly known as Courrèges boots, also in white vinyl, and futuristic accessories such as horizontally slitted glasses, helmet-like hats, and geometric headdresses. All of this creates a decidedly astronaut effect. In this race to conquer space in fashion, André Courrèges is closely followed by another French designer, Pierre Cardin, also a great space enthusiast. He wanted to invent clothes for the world of tomorrow, and whose 1965 Cosmocore collection was inspired by American Ed White, the first astronaut to perform a spacewalk. How did space inspire Pierre Cardin? In terms of cuts and silhouettes, we find geometric shapes with trapeze dresses, modified triangles, clean and minimalist lines. Throughout the 60s, from 1963 to 1967, the Cosmocore line presented unisex clothing cut to define the shape of the garment rather than that of the body. The colors used are relatively similar to those of Courrèges. Pierre Cardin experimented extensively with materials, vinyl, plastic, rubber, metal, aluminum, and other synthetic textiles, shiny, glossy, in primary, saturated, contrasting tones. His unisex approach matches this vision of the future. He designed clothes that will be worn by both men and women using the same cuts, colors, and materials. He envisioned the fashion of the future for the 2000s with understated neutral silhouettes and functional, versatile clothing. Pierre Cardin's signature space-age pieces include vinyl boots, helmets, and other plastic or plexiglass headgear reminiscent of spacesuits, futuristic goggles and visors in colored or translucent plastic, dresses with cutout necklines and contrasting panels, structured coats, jackets, and ensembles, often without collars, lapels, or buttons to accentuate the purity of the lines. Micro-mini skirts, leggings, and bodycon jumpsuits in stretchy materials, and the 1971 Espace Watch Collection 9, featuring geometric shapes, synthetic materials, bold colors, and designs inspired by spaceships and science fiction. All of this creates a unisex approach and an optimistic vision of fashion of the future. The third iconic designer of the 1960s space age was the Spanish Paco Rabanne, an industrial designer by training and nicknamed the metallurgist of fashion by our dear Coco Chanel, who seemed to have a nickname for everyone. His universe, also inspired by space, is built around a futurism influenced by a Western mythological past and the climate of the Cold War. Paco Rabanne stands out for his desire to avoid using traditional textiles and production methods. He creates clothes from discs, rings, plates, and pellets, assembled without thread or needles, but with rivets, rings, and metal links, all manually. A technique inspired by architecture and engineering. The materials used include metal, aluminum, steel, rhodoid and industrial plastic, vinyl, fluorescent leather, paper, and optical fibers. Needless to say, these aren't necessarily very wearable clothes, and his dresses were even described as unwearable. This blend of techniques and materials will give rise to a futuristic, even retrofuturistic aesthetic inspired by ancient times. The garments will be metallic sculptures creating robotic silhouettes with highly geometric lines, sometimes asymmetrical cuts, and placed on transparency. The colors are metallic, such as gold and silver, monochrome, and vibrant. The result is silhouettes inspired by the universe of space. The key pieces of the space age, according to Paco Rabanne, are dresses like metallic or plastic chainmail dresses, like the one worn by Françoise Hardy in 1966, made entirely of gold plates and diamonds, or dresses with giant sequins, butchers' aprons transformed into bags, leotards made of metal stripes, molded plastic corsets like what Jane Fonda wore in the 1968 film Barbarella, wide, rigid belts. Courrèges, Cardin, and Rabanne, even if they are the leading figures of the space age fashion of the 60s, are not the only ones to have influenced this aesthetic. Other names are also worth mentioning, such as Marie Quant, who introduced the miniskirt and the mini-short in 1962, pieces that would be widely used in the Courrèges, Cardin, and Rabanne collections, or Giancarlo Zanatta, who launched in 1969 the famous moon boots, directly inspired by the boots worn by the astronauts of the Apollo 11 mission. Rudy Gernrein, American designers, who also introduced the monokini in 1964. All these names and more have helped propel fashion toward a forward-looking aesthetic inspired by space exploration, technological advancement, and an optimistic vision of the future. Because, indeed, space exploration means the future. And this space fashion of the 60s completely revolutionized haute couture, propelling it fully into the future by introducing materials and techniques from space research while anticipating the significant growth of technology in clothing. It also laid the foundations for a futuristic style that continues to influence contemporary designers, both through its formal audacity and its forward-looking imagination. The space age style is part of a broader movement, that of futuristic design and the atomic age, where we find organic, rounded shapes and an explosion of colors. This aesthetic is both utopian and playful in response to the fear of nuclear war and the enthusiasm for scientific progress. The 1960s, then, were the golden age of the space age in fashion, and of a certain golden age for space exploration itself. What happened next? Did this space aesthetic survive? How did it adapt to changing societal priorities? As we have just seen, the 1960s saw the birth of space fashion following the conquest of space, with the first manned flights culminating in 1969 with the first steps on the moon. André Courrèges, Pierre Cardin, and Paco Rabanne launched the space age style, characterized by futuristic silhouettes, the use of synthetic materials such as vinyl, plastic, metal, and geometric patterns. The clothes are shiny, modular, and evoke technological optimism, the utopian vision of progress and faith in the future, all quite characteristic of this decade. But what about other decades, during which optimism and faith in the future became less obvious maybe? What did they do to space age fashion? During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, following the explosion of the space age, fashion naturally integrated certain so-called space codes. Technical, more synthetic materials and innovative cuts remained. The purely futuristic aesthetics, meanwhile, disappeared, and reinterpretations became more and more varied. Space-inspired clothing became increasingly functional and found its way into sportswear and outerwear. The exceptions, however, are Thierry Mugler and Alexander McQueen. These two designers drew on the imagination of space to create sculptural silhouettes using shiny materials and looks evoking creators or travelers from other worlds, perpetuating the legacy of the space age, but more into extraterrestrial alien life. The 2000s saw a resurgence of space age fascination in the form of collaborations. The technological innovation at the heart of the first space age makes a strong comeback with the development and introduction of innovative smart textiles into collections. Collaborations between fashion houses and space agencies are on the rise. The retro-futuristic space age aesthetic is making a comeback through the material used, shapes, cuts, technologies, and scenography of runway shows and campaigns. Among the contemporary fashion designers most inspired by space, we can name Iris van Herpen, who is known for futuristic creations. She incorporates themes related to weightlessness, metamorphosis, and infinity into her collections by collaborating with architects and scientists. She uses innovative materials and techniques such as 3D printing to evoke lightness and movement, creating microarchitectures in motion that explore the boundary between the body and the universe. Another name could be Marine Serre, whose iconic crescent moon logo can be considered a direct reference to the space conquest of the 60s and the timeless fascination that humans have always had for the Earth satellite. Jeremy Scott, former artistic director of Moschino, revisited the iconic moon boots inspired by the boots worn during the Apollo 11 mission, mixing humor and space references. Chanel, for its Fall-Winter 2017 show, drew direct inspiration from the space age of the 60s with star-spangled jackets, metallic coats, rocket or planet-shaped handbags, and iridescent accessories evoking interstellar travel. Not to mention the life-size rocket that was installed under the glass roof of the Grand Palais and which took off, closing this space show. Balenciaga, under the direction of Demna Gvasalia, presented a runway show for its Spring-Summer 2023 collection, the set of which simulated the surface of the planet Mars, or a post-apocalyptic world according to some interpretations. In 2018, Louis Vuitton launched a line called Spaceship, featuring handbags and other accessories reinterpreted with spaceship motifs and metallic details to pay homage to intergalactic travel and the cosmic imagination. This Space Odyssey meets space age inspiration can be found in the Cruise 2022 collection developed for the brand by Nicolas Ghesquière, who said in an interview, "I don't know why, but thinking about futurism, space conquest, and what we could call the space colony has always been an obsession. Giants around the world are investing in it, and what once seemed unreal is now bringing us closer to space." Are we seeing the premises of space cruise or space resort collections? And the list can go on. There is no shortage of references. What about collaborations between fashion brands and various space agencies? These have multiplied in recent years. In 2019, Under Armour, in collaboration with Virgin Galactic Future Astronaut, designed a complete collection of suits, jackets, and accessories combining design, innovation, and personalization as badge, flags, pockets, and so on for future space tourists. In 2021, Balenciaga collaborated with NASA to create coats and accessories inspired by astronaut suits, including asymmetrical cuts, technical materials, and metallic colors. Pierre Cardin, in partnership with the European Space Agency, designs training outfits for astronauts. In 2024, the fashion house presented a haute couture spacesuit intended to dress astronauts during their training in a center reproducing the atmospheric conditions of the moon. Also in 2024, the Lobster and Lemonade brand collaborate with the ESA, the European Space Agency, to launch a streetwear line featuring the agency's official logo, cosmic motifs, and designs inspired by the conquest of space. You'd think 2024 was the year of space collaborations. You certainly haven't missed Prada's announcement and its recent collaboration with Axiom Space, an American company that organizes space trips. The Italian fashion brand has developed a suit called the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit, AXIMU, that would be worn by astronauts on Artemis 3, NASA's new lunar mission scheduled for 2026. And the relationship between fashion and space is showing no signs of slowing down. In 2025, futuristic imagination seems to be making a comeback in the collections of Iris van Herpen, Coperni, Courrèges, and Balenciaga. This craze for all things space-related is even more relevant with the recent space flight on April the 14th, 2025, by Blue Origin, owned by billionaire Jeff Bezos, boss of Amazon. An all-female crew composed of Katy Perry, the singer, Gayle King, journalist, Lauren Sanchez, girlfriend of Jeff Bezos, Amanda Nguyen, scientist, Carrie Flynn, director and film producer, Aisha Bao, former NASA engineer, was sent into the stratosphere. These 6 women wore midnight blue jumpsuits, reminiscent of astronaut uniforms, co-created by Lauren Sanchez, Fernando Garcia, and Laura Kim, the co-founders of the New York luxury brand Mons and creative directors of Oscar de la Renta. These jumpsuits were designed to be flattering and sexy, with a body-hugging cut. They include a compression layer, a mandarin collar, a double zipper at the bust, which can be unzipped for a maxi cleavage, and a belt for a defined waist. Spacesuit, but making it sexy and glamorous, please. Not forgetting the highly publicized rescue of the 2 astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, stuck in the International Space Station since June 5th, 2025, by Elon Musk's SpaceX in mid-March 2025. Enough to inspire future collections for space tourists. The new stars are now space travelers, astronauts. Thomas Pesquet is a perfect example. His blue spacesuit bearing the European Space Agency logo inspired Louis Vuitton for one of its campaigns entitled Into the Unknown, featuring children dressed as astronauts. Fashion clothing is giving way to the astronaut's uniform and the values it conveys. And the contributions of space to fashion aren't limited to cuts or colors. Innovations in space textiles are increasingly being used in Earth-based fashion. You may be wearing a spacesuit textile without even realizing it. The main space materials used in current fashion are the Gore-Tex, which was originally developed for spacesuits and is now found in technical and urban clothing thanks to its waterproof, breathable, and windproof properties. The Kevlar, a textile with exceptional heat and impact resistance, is now used in streetwear, sports equipment, and some luxury accessories. The Captain, a very lightweight polyimide film resistant to extreme temperatures, is used to insulate space equipment. It is also used in the creation of collections and accessories focused on performance and innovation. The Graphene, a ultralight material 20 times stronger than steel, is being integrated into fashion for its strength, lightness, and thermal conductivity. All the smart textiles directly derived from space research that are capable of regulating temperature, wicking away moisture, and self-cleaning are increasingly used in high-end sportswear and connected clothing. And to round up this non-exhaustive list, let's add advanced composites, such as carbon fibers and nanotubes, which are used in aerospace for their lightness and strength, and also are appearing in fashion, particularly for accessories, shoes, and other high-performance clothing. In addition to innovating materials, we can add advanced manufacturing techniques such as 3D printing, digital modeling, and laser cutting, which allow fashion designers to create new textures and shapes. constantly pushing the boundaries of traditional design and paving the way for personalized and adaptive clothing. One last point, space research is also inspiring the development of biosourced and eco-responsible materials adapted to life in extreme environments. This approach encourages fashion to innovate towards greater sustainability, anticipating the needs of a possible human life outside Earth or on a much less hospitable Earth. Because let's not hide behind the glitter of the space age. Our planet is not doing well. And the collections of recent years inspired by space do not all show us an optimistic future, like the space age of the 60s. Some collections, on the contrary, will combine space conquest and a post-apocalyptic world, rather pessimistic as a result, difficult to situate in time and space. Could this be the translation of the political and ecological uncertainties linked to our era, combined with a wave of anachronistic science fiction? For the Dior Men Fall Winter 2023 collection, Kim Jones, then artistic director, drew heavily on this retro-futuristic science fiction. A model in a white suit, helmet reminiscent of the spacesuits' military boots, reminding us that astronauts are, above all, military personnel, all mixed with antique references, drapes, capes, and a touch of science fiction. For its Resort 2023 collection, Balmain drew inspiration from the world of Frank Herpen's Dune novel series, which were adapted into films starring Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, showcasing draping, gender-neutral cuts, and desert-like hues in shades of ochre and brown. Craig Green's Spring-Summer 2023 collection, meanwhile, is a nod to the space age of the 60s with a retro-futuristic touch. The clothes are silver and the designs are composed of outerwear, majority. References to the traditional costumes of desert-dwelling peoples are becoming increasingly common, mixed with space references. We can see the influence of science fiction and the presentation of the desert as a symbol of aridity, the absence of lush life, a certain vision of the future. The desert, moreover, serves as training for astronauts to simulate a walk on the moon or as analogies to Martian living condition. Futuristic fashion is increasingly inspired by these areas hostile to life. But what makes us think that a collection is potentially inspired by space? I imagine you already have your own ideas on the subject. First, there are certain accessories that are unmissable. The famous mood boots by Giancarlo Zanatta, inspired by the boots worn during the Apollo 11 missions to the moon in 1969. These boots have become one of the most visible symbols of space fashion and are regularly reinterpreted by major fashion houses such as Fendi, Dior, and Jeremy Scott for Moschino. Staying in the field of footwear, let's not forget the Courrèges boots, these white vinyl boots, symbol of the space-age version of the 60s. Add to that the retro-futuristic sneakers inspired by the space universe, approaching avant-garde designs, metallic colors, and details inspired by astronaut suits. Goggles and other visors inspired by those worn by astronauts in space are also worth checking out. They will be oversized and tinted. All accessories will be reminiscent of planets, spaceships, and constellations, metallic, silver, and white colors, reflective, thermoregulating textiles, and other high-tech materials derived from space research, aesthetics yet functional cuts, variations of jackets, parka, caps, and other down jackets for protective purposes like emergency blankets, porthole collar jackets, and other references to astronauts' uniforms. All that plus patterns and embroidery of stars, planets, and constellations, the use of sequins and beads for luminous reflective effect. As we saw, high-tech materials and textile innovations are increasingly used in fashion. Smart textiles capable of regulating temperature, anti-gravity, and self-cleaning fabrics are now increasingly integrated into civilian fashion to provide comfort and functionality. Metallic effects and cosmic colors are found on silver boots, bags, belts, and other accessories for mirrored or chrome effect, paying homage to spacesuits and the interstellar universe. Geometric shapes and clean lines are also present, echoing the space age aesthetic of the 60s, but updated with modern materials and sophisticated finishes. And let's not forget the accessories inspired by science fiction series and films, which also influenced the catwalks. Speaking of science fiction, the first person to dream of conquering space was Jules Verne and his novel From the Earth to the Moon, published in 1865. It was maybe the first science fiction novel. It inspired, in any case, the first space science fiction film, A Trip to the Moon, released in 1902 and produced by George Méliès. Let's not forget Hergé's comic strip, Tintin, On a marché sur la Lune, We Walk on the Moon, published in 1954. And all of this was well before the space race of the 60s. Since then, popular references have followed one another, and space exploration, extraterrestrial life, and post-apocalyptic societies are recurring themes in the science fiction genre. It would be tedious to list them all here, and I will only mention those that make sense to me. Feel free to share your own by commenting on this episode. One big reference will be the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick and released in 1968. Let's not forget the Star Wars series by George Lucas from 1977, Star Trek, Apollo 13 by Ron Howard in 1995, Gravity by Alfonso Cuarón in 2013, Interstellar by Christopher Nolan in 2014, The Martian by Ridley Scott in 2015, The Fifth Element by Luc Besson in 1997 with costumes by Jean-Paul Gaultier, the Netflix series The Three-Body Problem, inspired by the books of the Chinese author Liu Xingning, the cartoon Ulysses 31, released in France in 1981 and inspired by the Greek mythology of Odyssey, transposed to the 31st century, or Captain Flam, another cartoon from the 80s that rocked my childhood. Some of you may remember the series Target SG-1 with Richard Dean Anderson, mixing space exploration, aliens, and Egyptian mythology. More recently, we could mention the series The Big Bang Theory, Numbers, or the film adaptations of the Dune books. All these references shape our perception of space and its conquest, fuel our imagination, and lead us to reflect on clothing the futuristic costume to meet the demands of these virtual and distant worlds, but perhaps not so much. Designers draw inspiration from science fiction and cinema to imagine clothes and everyday objects transformed into symbols of modernity and cosmic exploration that could become the norm in the decades to come. The 2020 Space Age 3.0 is a blend of science fiction inspired by the history of civilizations, the daily lives of astronauts, and post-apocalyptic fashion. It includes high-tech materials, metallic effects, cosmic patterns, geometric shapes, collaborations with aerospace, and strong influences from pop culture and science fiction. This influence of the space age exploration imagination seems enduring and universal, continuing to fuel fashion at all levels, from major luxury brands to more accessible brands. Star motifs, geometric shapes, and innovative materials are now omnipresent in current collections. Fashion and the conquest of space maintain a fruitful dialogue where imagination, technology, and style intertwine to shape a constantly renewed vision of the future. I'm going to repeat myself, but when we will see space resort collections for space tourists? But ultimately, why this fascination? Well, for several reasons. Space acts as an escape. In a world in crisis, whether ecological, political, or identity related, space remains the last realm of dreams. It's the absolute elsewhere, a limitless, mysterious world where everything seems possible. Fashion too projects its desire of escape, innovation, and renewal into it. This fascination with space also allows us to imagine another body. Clothing inspired by the space age evokes protective armor against an uncertain world, post-human forms beyond gender or biology, an aesthetic of the augmented body reinvented to survive elsewhere. And finally, there is a certain nostalgia for the future and this fascination with space, which is quite paradoxical. It's true. The space age is an aesthetic of the future which comes to us from the past, from the 60s, as we have seen. But here, what fascinates us is not so much the future itself as the idea of the future that we had back in the time. A naive, elegant, structured future. A future that shone in every sense of the word. Our current vision of the future is much further removed from the bright tomorrows. This fascination with space, the fact that we still dream about it, also reflects a reflection on the future of humanity, technology, and man's place in the universe, making fashion a mirror of aspirations and dreams related to space. Nowadays, this fascination with space and space conquest signifies a certain openness to the unknown, the adoption of innovations, the expression of an imagination turned towards the future. This fascination allows us to appropriate a part of this dream, optimism, and audacity. And more concretely, this fascination and adaptation of spacesuits for life on Earth is also an awareness of the challenges to be faced in the future. Our beautiful planet is dying. Living conditions will become more and more extreme, more polluted air, scarcer water, greater variations in weather and temperature. Will these suits developed for space be necessary in the near future to live on Earth? And what about these indecent investments in the search for Plan B, a new habitable planet where life would be sweeter, better? In short, dreaming of the conquest of space allows us to dream, to hope, to escape from a daily life marked by wars and eco-anxiety, to invent a post-human world with its own codes, its own aesthetics, a genderless body, an augmented body, a half-human, half-robot hybrid, which will surpass the limits of man, thanks perhaps to artificial intelligence. Something that will be necessarily better, simpler, more organic than what we have now. Since the 1960s, space fashion has evolved from a utopian vision marked by material innovation and futuristic imagination to a more functional and technological integration while maintaining a persistent fascination with space and progress. Today, space fashion oscillates between homage to the pioneers of the space age and textile innovations, reflecting an enduring relationship and fascination between space exploration and sartorial creativity. In any case, fashion hasn't stopped dreaming of stars and beyond. Between techno-fantasies, 60s nostalgia, and contemporary anxiety, the space age is still with us, reinvented by each generation. Because ultimately, dressing like a futurist is perhaps the most elegant way to say that we don't know what awaits us and to embrace it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast. If you enjoyed this interstellar escapade, leave me a little comment, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with someone who dreams of dancing on the moon and in the stars in a Prada spacesuit. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform so you don't miss a single episode. And head over to Instagram to discover the podcast new visual diary, The Box of Time, Space Age Edition, a selection of images, silhouettes, and inspirations from the fashion galaxy. I'm Catherine, and you've just listened to another episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. See you soon for a new journey through fashion's fabulous history.